Well, hi all you dude and dudettes, and hello to you hobby hunters, and hi to my boredom busters. I am Brad Claybaugh, your host, and this is Brad's Boredom Busters. This is the channel that explores all kinds of arts and crafts, and so if you're looking for something new to do, this is the place for you. Alright, so let's get into this video. So recently we've been doing some tie-dye projects, and so I thought I'd do a video for the beginner tie-dyer. This video will show beginners the things they need to know, the supplies they need to have, and some helpful hints. So Buster, why don't you show these fine folks how they can subscribe and what to do when they do subscribe. Okay, so like I said, this video is for the beginner tie-dyer, but this video can also be for people that have some experience in tie-dye. I might be able to show you a trick or two that you never thought of. So let's start off with materials that you need to do tie-dye. So the materials that you would normally need for tie-dye is obviously something to dye. It needs to be 100% natural fiber. So cotton, wool, silk, anything that's natural fiber. Your most typical thing is 100% cotton t-shirts or skirts. So as the term tie-dye implies, you tie it up. And so to do so, one of the more common materials for that will be rubber bands. You can get these anywhere. I got like the rubber band balls at like an office supply store. Then another material that's very common for tie-dye is kite string. I suggest getting actually the cheapest and lightest weight kite string that you can find, because that actually works better than the heavier. And then another very common material for tying up your patterns is sinew. Sinew is a cord that's been waxed. It's very strong, and when you tie it up, you pull it very tight, and that inhibits the dye from reaching that part of the fabric, so it helps to outline your pattern. And your water-soluble fabric marker. And so then when we get into doing patterns, like say you tie with your rubber bands, your kite string, your sinew, sometimes some of the patterns have very specific angles to it. My last video we did, it had a peace sign. The peace sign, the first fold is at 60 degrees. So it's very helpful to have a protractor to lay out your angles. And so then the other part of tie-dye is your dye. So obviously you want to pick a good quality brand. I tend to like to use Dharma brand dyes, but then to mix your dye, you'll need several things as well. So you'll need measuring spoons. I have an assortment of sizes depending on what the dye calls for proportions to liquid. Also, I have measuring cups that I use more when I mix up the soda ash, which we'll get into that here in a little bit. You'll also, most likely, it makes it easier, you'll need a funnel. The funnel then makes it easier to get your dye powder into your bottle that you're mixing it into. And then also, if the brand that you're using asks for any additional materials to go in with their dye, such as the Dharma brand ask for urea to go in with the dye. So it makes it easier to get the dye and the urea into the bottle. And as far as the bottles, I deal with several different sizes. This one is an 8 ounce. This is a 16 ounce. I tend to get these at beauty supply stores. They're usually relatively cheap. A lot of times I look for sales, and so you can stock up on your bottles that way. I figured when I started, if they're good enough for hair dye, they're good enough for my dye for my shirts. So I mentioned then another material. You do need to soak your shirts or the fabric that you're dyeing in soda ash. And so I purchased soda ash from Dharma. A lot of fabric craft stores that have tie-dye supplies, they carry soda ash as well. But usually they're a very small amount. When you use your soda ash, it gets mixed 1 cup of soda ash to 1 gallon of water. I tend to use a 2-gallon bucket, and I mix up 2 gallons at a time, because if I'm dyeing shirts, I'm usually doing multiples at a time. So that way it has enough liquid in the bucket to cover, say 3, 4, 5 t-shirts at one time. So another thing that is helpful to use when you're mixing up the soda ash is a stick blender. The soda ash tends to clump up if you don't get it blended quickly. So as you pour it into the water, and usually kind of warm water to help it dissolve quicker, then I use the stick blender to break up the clumps and dissolve it completely in the water. And so if you've ever watched any of my previous tie-dye videos, you know when I get ready to actually dye the shirts and then rinse them out and get them ready to go into the wash, I like to wear a full apron over my clothes so I don't splash dye on it. Also, it's very handy to wear gloves, and I purchase rubber gloves or latex gloves in 100-count boxes. I'd like to get the large amount, just that way I have enough for multiple jobs. Also, they're very handy if you're into acrylic pouring. That can be rather messy too, so it's nice to wear the gloves for doing acrylic pouring as well. But yeah, they're keeps the dye off your skin. So it's a good idea to wear gloves every time you're doing your tie-dye. And so now when it comes down to mixing up your dye, depending on the manufacturer that you use, it's good to go onto their website. A lot of times they have specific instructions on how to mix up their dye. As I've said before, I use Dharma dyes, and on their website, they do have beginner's guide to tie-dyeing. It's a printout called Tie-Dyeing Basics, and that gives you their formulas for mixing up their dye. All right, Busters, we're out here in the garage. So a couple other things that are helpful to have when you're tie-dyeing is after you've tied up your pattern and you've dyed it and it's cured for 24 hours, it's helpful to have a place designated just to rinse that out, because you want to rinse out the excess dye that didn't absorb into the fabric, and then obviously then that goes into the wash. But I have a laundry sink out here in the garage. You can use your kitchen sink if it's stainless steel. If it's a porcelain sink, I wouldn't recommend it because the dye will probably stain the porcelain and you'd have a heck of a time getting that cleaned out. If you have a stainless steel sink, it probably is okay. I've also seen people take large tubs and just rinse it out in the backyard with a hose. But it's really convenient to have the laundry sink. I also have this surface here that fits across my sink. I can apply the dye here as well, and it's just a shelf from a cabinet. It's painted, so it's kind of easy to clean up. And so I want to give you my first helpful hint. So for all you tie-dyers that have some experience, let me give you one of my helpful hints that I find it helps extend the life of your dye. Say you're mixed up a quantity of dye for a project and you have quite a bit left over, and it's sitting around for a little while. And say if it sits around for a week, I mean, it's still good to use right away. But say if you have that, and it's expensive, you don't want to throw it away. So it's sitting around for 3-4 weeks maybe. Sometimes there's particles in there that start to solidify. So I find a good way to be able to reuse that dye without it kind of messing up, the look of your dye pattern and, the result on your fabric, is I take coffee filters and put it in a funnel, and then I'll pour my old dye through the filter into a new clean bottle, and that'll eliminate any particles that have solidified. So I have a large project that I'm going to do soon, and I've got quite a bit of dye that I want to cycle through the filters, so I'm going to do that now. Depending on how much solidified material that you have in your dye, it may take longer for some colors to go through the filter than others. Sometimes it also helps to just kind of hold up the bag a little bit, because with all that moisture, it creates kind of a suction around the bottom. So it's like holding your finger on top of a straw. The liquid won't flow through. So if you pick it up and let a little air underneath the bag, then it tends to flow a little better also. Okay, Busters, and then one other helpful thing to have for your tie-dye. I mean, it has to cure for 24 hours. A lot of beginners just shove it in a plastic bag to help keep it moist. The problem with that is when you put it in a bag, a lot of times colors will mix that you don't want. You'll get one color on another color just sliding it in. So I have a large plastic tub that I have some metal shelving as a rack on the bottom that keeps it off the bottom, allows excess dye to drip down, and then that way you're not moving it around and getting dye over other pieces of dye. And then I also put a lid over it to help keep the moisture in for the 24 hours for it to cure. And then it can come out and be rinsed off and washed. But yeah, it's helpful to have a tub with a rack for curing your tie-dye. Okay, Busters, so I hope you enjoyed that video about tie-dye basics. If this video was informative for you and you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Also, tell your friends about us. And check out one of our other videos. I'll put a link to it here at the end. I'll put a link to one of our first tie-dye videos. It's comparing the process of ice dye to liquid dye. I think you'll really like that. Check it out. All right, well, thanks for watching our video. And remember, peace out and go bust out some art. Okay.